All right, back with you now on the news feed late night. Coming out of that statement delivered by President Cyril Ramaphosa on the 109th celebration of the African National Congress. In this conversation this evening, political analyst and scholar Dr. Somadoda Fikeni with us, as well as Professor Susan Booysen. And with me in the studio is our politics editor, Sbu Ngalo. Prof. Susan, I come to you. We hear the president saying what the ANC would need to do. Give the Integrity Commission some teeth. I think the word that they use is strengthen the Integrity Commission and make sure that those who have corrupt practices, I suppose, as a shadow behind them, are held to account. This Integrity Commission has not so far been able to hold anyone to account, has it?
No, indeed, you are perfectly right. It was not a convincing statement by the president at all that it will be strengthened. We've heard it several times. We've heard in recent months or in the course of the last year that it has received more administrative power, that it had received more members. And we've seen that in operation, but yet the Integrity Commission remains a structure that is subject to the NEC. And the NEC is a highly contested space. It is one of those war zones that the president in tonight's speech also said he doesn't, and Bladen Zamande reiterated that NGCs and conferences, they didn't mention the NEC, should not be used as war zones. So there was nothing except the reiteration of the statement, the words by the president, that suggested that there is new, tangible, additional powers, that the commission will be strengthened, that its messages, its findings will be taken to heart. We do not know yet what the ANC will be doing, intends doing, to cross that threshold. It is important as such that the president reiterates and repeats these words, that there must be accountability and members must come forward voluntarily and must step aside immediately if they cannot explain themselves sufficiently. But there are many, many words between those actions and many actions that will not be taken unless there is really a dramatic change. And evidence of such dramatic change, better powers, authoritative powers for the Integrity Commission, those were not forthcoming tonight.
Dr. Fikeni, in a year, once again, still of the pandemic, seeing a second wave with a variant that is, of course, not following what we saw in the first wave, the president talking about economic renewal and reconstruction and redevelopment. Do you believe the president when he says things like, we are planning to mobilize investment, create new jobs in particular, and he says support existing ones, and talk about supporting existing ones? We're currently under lockdown level 3, and there are industries that have been shut completely that are not operating. Talk about the hospitality sector in particular. Is it believable when he says things like that?
Well, I do think that he would be believable if the state capacity to deliver was improved quite significantly, if corruption was reduced to bare minimum, and if there was a strong, audacious, decisive leadership at all levels. To that extent, then these would be believable. But without those elements, anything that is promised can be implemented, but very often incrementally and tentatively. You want to have a dramatic, drastic turnaround because structurally and in terms of capacity, that has not yet been demonstrated. And yet, when you have a crisis, these are moments in many countries throughout the world where you create opportunities out of a crisis to tinker with and fundamentally change the system in order to perform better.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Dr. Fikeni, is that if the president was to convince society, broad society, that the ANC can handle the economic recovery better, he had to first go over the hurdle of convincing society that the ANC can be better itself.
without any doubt, and not just the ANC leadership can demonstrate a common purpose and be principled without being obsessed with its internal divisions, then it can have the mind space to deal with the strategic issues. But for as long as we see the theater and the drama of internal divisions, of conspiracy theories, of factional fights, then it is crippled in many ways before it can even look beyond itself. And the issue of the deployment of cadres, some of them because of their factional loyalties and political connections, instead of capacity, is also crippling the state capacity, as you are beginning to see in many investigations, what has been happening when you begin to weaken institutions in order to strengthen individuals to service a patronage network.
Now, Professor Booysen, just building up on that point about corruption. Now, the SACP, the ANC relies on its allies, the SACP and COSATU, and we heard Blade Zimande there talking about how the ANC needs to be strong in terms of dealing with corruption. And I think also from a COSATU perspective, they'd be interested in terms of what the ANC plans in securing and also creating jobs, knowing that we've lost a number of jobs recently. What do you think, particularly as we're going to an election year, do you think a COSATU and an SACP would be satisfied with this speech? And also, what can they tell their members as they rally support for the ANC going into the local government elections?
I think especially Blade Zimande made it very clear that it is imperative for the ANC and their support for the ANC, although the SACP is not withdrawing that, but imperative for that to the ANC to be unambiguously clean, to ensure that it gets rid of state capture and corruption, and that would be the basis of building that future relationship. And there we heard Cyril Ramaphosa also saying in his speech, referring to the local government elections, that it's essential for the ANC, of course it is, to build a definitive victory and achieve that kind of victory. And that is, of course, one of the great contradictions of our time. And we saw that in recent spates of by-elections, that the ANC really did well in by-elections. And yet the ANC is pretty weak on not just its track record, but on its reassurances that it is going to get better and cleaner. And the speech tonight reminded me very much of Cyril Ramaphosa's early 2019, the January the 8th statement speech, where we had very, very similar reassurances of the ANC coming clean, the ANC recognizing that it has to do better in order to retain the trust and credibility that's so essential to its electoral performances. We heard almost those exact words to the exact same effect in early 2019. And voters went and they voted for the ANC on the understanding and the trust that that was really happening. Cyril Ramaphosa tonight used virtually the same words in context of not fully recognizing that much water has run under the bridge since then, since early 2019, and that the ANC has sacrificed credibility. So if the ANC is indeed intent and think it will be able to sustain these by-election performances into a general local government election, then it would really have to build on bringing home reasons for trust by the electorate. Otherwise, voters are going to withdraw and those electoral percentages are going to go down, which would mean that an electoral performance could really ring hollow if the ANC wins, but on very low turnout percentages because the ANC is not trusted and opposition parties really do not offer much better. So in order to take tonight's reassurances, statements from the president into election mode, much convincing evidence would have to be added.
Yeah. Dr. Fikeni, let's maybe finish off on this note. The president saying what is quite critical here is, once again, that social compact. The president normally points out to the social compact and he speaks about the general consensus at NEDLAC that we're in agreement. But we know that as soon as the alliance partners, for example, COSATU, come out of that NEDLAC, they actually never agree with any of that which has been agreed upon at NEDLAC. So the whole question around the reforms, particularly in the establishment of the presidential stimulus employment package, what do you think COSATU's reaction is going to be to that?
Well, let me start by saying that the social compact itself, if it is confined only to NEDLAC, will be very limited in scope and very much hidden away from the public. If you want a social compact on a scale where you're changing the society, you may need something that involves the society, as was the case when the constitution was being drawn. Then you will have the entire 58, 59 million people closer to consensus. The second one, I do think that there are fault lines between the ANC and COSATU. The first one, COSATU does feel that the consultation in terms of policy changes and pronouncements is not as would have been. They often meet with the ANC at NEDLAC instead of meeting as alliance partners and strategize. And secondly, there are moments where you'll have retrenchments in the state-owned companies and issues such as the salaries of the public servants. And some of the biggest affiliates of COSATU are unions of public servants. Therefore, there is already an inbuilt tension between the governing party and COSATU on some of these issues, even though they will continue in their alliance, but there will always be these underlying tensions.
Professor Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, I beg your pardon. Thank you very much for your time tonight. And Professor Susan Booysen, thank you very much for joining us. And Smoo, I think this is where we're going to have to say goodbye to you as well this evening. You're back again in the morning with